Well, tēnā koutou katoa. No America ho no te tematanga, ko te taita toku manga, ko waitaki toku awa, ko ototahi toku kainga inai nei, e roia toku tunga mahi o Perryfield Lawyers, ko Stephen mo toko ingoa, no reira ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. It's wonderful to welcome you here. I'm really grateful that so many of you are giving up a bit of your day to hear a progress update on this initiative. Initially, I called it the 15 risks that charities face, but I've gotten such a large number of responses back that I've realized that maybe there's more than 15. So I've kind of expanded it a little bit and gone into themes. So the purpose of this call is to update anybody who's interested in what I'm doing on this, and to invite your further participation and collaboration. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to do a little talking about the genesis for what we're here to talk about. And then I'm going to explain the current status of the documents and what's happened so far. And then what I'm planning to do is send you into breakout rooms so that you can have a chance to meet someone, because I don't want this just to be a session of watching me talking. I want you to get something out of it by potentially meeting a new person as well. And I'm going to have some pointed questions for you, because ultimately I want this document or this set of documents to become the best possible resource it can be. And I know that that will only happen if lots of people are involved and providing feedback and input. So we've got a wide variety of people who've joined now. And there's a whole bunch of other people who have been getting the emails as well. Almost 100 people have been involved in some way, either in giving input or in receiving the documents and starting to have a look at them. So just before I tell you about the project, to introduce myself, not all of you I have met in person. I've met many of you online, but my name is Stephen Moe. I'm a partner at Perryfield Lawyers. We've got about 80 people working in our law firm, and I'm based from Ototahi, Christchurch. We have 4 offices, and the team that I'm leading is really focused on purpose and impact. And that's kind of a strange topic for a lawyer to be interested in, but it's something that I think is really, really at the heart of organizations. And it means that I'm often helping charities as well as companies, people who want to do things a little bit differently. So for a number of years now, and some of you were there way back at the beginning, when COVID happened, I started a group of people who were gathering, and that became a weekly thing. And then over time, it just has evolved. But through that, there's now 750 people on an email list. And so that was the list I went out to say, I pulled together a table of risks that charities and for-purpose groups face. Would you be willing to help me to make it better? And that's what's happened. And really the philosophy behind this is that I think too often, particularly from a Western conception, it's all about the individual, and it's about something that I produced or I made. And I really want to flip that on its head and say, what could we do as a collective? How can we make things better if we come together and if we actually learn from each other? And it's more about cooperation instead of competition. So that's the rationale behind why I sent the email out. From the 750, I think there's been about 100 people who've written back to say they'd like to see the document. And then of those, I think it's about 49 or 50 have actually provided actual comments. So some people have provided quite detailed ones. Some have found a typo. Some have added one line. It's all gratefully received. And so the document started as 4 pages with a table. And if you're here, you probably saw that version. But I've quickly realized that there's a lot of wisdom that's coming back. So last week I was on holiday in Hawaii, which was beautiful. And on the flight home, there was an 8-hour Honolulu to Auckland flight. So I got all of the responses, and I'm grateful for someone at Perryfield who helped me compile that, named Kelly. She's not on this call, but I want to acknowledge her. And so those 8 hours I just spent consolidating and pulling it together. And as I did that, I realized that instead of one document, it was getting overwhelming because there was so much good content. So what I thought would be more helpful for people was to split it up into topics. And the rationale behind that, I'm open to being wrong on any of this, by the way, so feel free to push back. But the rationale was that someone will be able to dive into this guide and realize that it's part 1 of 5, and that this is the focus is governance. So they'll look at it and they'll go, okay, I'm looking at governance, and that it won't be overwhelming in the sense of it's just a couple pages long. It's not a 20, 25 page document, but they'll realize that, oh, maybe I should look at part 2 of 5, which is people. And maybe I should look at part 3 of 5, which is the assets. And maybe I should look at part 4, so that's the kind of the thinking. And I did kind of split it up like that. In the grounds for splitting it up like that particular way is I thought governance is really at the core of strategy for an organization. What is your purpose? How do you define your purpose? So I thought if we can start with part 1 being governance, that's laying a foundation. And then part 2, I just think people are so important, right? So let's have people as the second one. And then part 3 is the assets or the property or the insurance and those sorts of things. Part 4 is then another layer on top, which is the policies. And then the part 5, which is, I haven't really finished it yet, but I just think for faith groups that they have unique characteristics and things which should be recognized. So that was why I split it into it's kind of an add-on, but I thought that was helpful. So that's the rationale and the background to how this now is coming into existence. It's something that I'm hopeful will be able to be easily shared across groups, and that it will be a reference point for them. It has become in some ways a kind of a checklist, like it's a question format. And I'm open to your feedback, like, is that the best way of helping people? But I'm really conscious that for many organizations and groups, it's not like they can afford to pay someone to help them. And so having a simple, not legalese, easy to read and understand guidance point like this should help those charities and for-purpose organizations. So I just thought it was helpful to give a bit of the background so that you understand the heart or the intention behind what's going on here. And that's why I opened it up, because I really think that we can really learn a lot from each other. Even this morning, I just had Mike Potter write to me. So he said, you should make this accessible for people who are blind. And so he's given me some wording to put so that the pictures, the front cover, the braided river, that they'll be able to access it in a way that would not be possible. So I welcome that. I love that, it's stimulating people to provide additional ideas and thoughts. So just to shout him out, he's Mike Potter, the CEO of Disability Connect. So I'm very grateful for that. So the point is, page number 2 has the current lists of people that I've heard from. And I'm conscious that many of you on the call, like there's 35 of you right now, you may not have had time yet to process or digest, but if you're willing to look over it, and I see Francesca there, you've self-identified as a typo spotter. I welcome it. Anything you find is welcome, because I want it to be a really helpful document. So you are all welcome to join the list if you're not there already by simply going into the document. Preferably, if you can put it in track change and then send back the documents, it just makes the processing a lot easier rather than handwritten comments. Because if I like your change, then if it's track changes, it's easy for me just to copy paste rather than having to decipher the scribbles and then type it out. But that's the type of, my hope is that a lot of you will write back. And equally, you might think there's someone else that could provide input, and I don't see them on the list yet. So I would love to have more feedback from Maori Pacifica perspective as an example. So that's the heart behind it. And then when I split it up, originally I split it into two, and it was governance, and then it was everything else. But I realized that the everything else was getting too big. So that's why it's now got the 4, splits to it. So I hope that that makes sense. And it's kind of a logical flow of like, where did this start from? How did it come about? And then how you can also get in. I'm just replying to someone who's asked me for the code. Yeah. All right. Now, the other thing that I wanted to ask all of you is, what do you think? What are your ideas? So what I'm hoping to do next is, first of all, keep using the chat. I see some people are typing in the chat. That's great, because I'll be able to see those comments afterwards as well. But what I thought would be really helpful is if I gave you some thoughts that you can then feedback on. So the first question I have is, what do you think of the sort of checklist approach, like the questions? They're meant to be quite short and to the point rather than long paragraphs. One of you sent me some other guides that people have written, but when I looked at them, they were like 60 pages, and it was very dense, like you gotta start your degree to really get into the content. So this is purposefully high level. So what do you think of that? Is that a helpful way of doing it? Should we have, for example, links to things like if there's a question and then there's a resource that collectively we know would help answer that question? Should we have a clickable link that you could say, does your board have a charter? Well, we know that the IOD provides a free template for that. Should we have a clickable link so then they could just go off and find it? So that's my first question, is the approach and sort of the style, because I'm not wedded to it. I just want to create something that will be really helpful for people. The second thing is, what do you think on your brief review, since I only emailed it yesterday, but is there something obvious that we're missing? Like, is there just a total topic that none of us have picked up that would be really helpful for people? So that's the second question. And then the third question would be, is there anything else that we could do to improve it? Is there any obvious things that we could do? So thank you, Brian, for your comment in the chat there. Yes to checklists and links. So maybe that might be the only feedback from this session, is we should have more links integrated into the questions. And then the last one, it's more just a question for, I'm not sure how to get this out. I feel really proud of what we're creating together, and I would love to get it in the hands of as many people as possible. So how do we do that? And that might be some of you saying, well, I've got a newsletter that goes out to some people and we can add it in there. Or is there other things? Are there other websites that we could have it loaded up to once it's ready? My aim with it, as I said in the cover email, is that if you can, so as well as the feedback you're going to give in this session, I'm going to send you to breakout rooms in a second. But as well as that, I would welcome, if you have time and are willing to open the document and go through and add anything else. If you can respond by the end of the month, I think that's a realistic time frame. So that's basically 3 weeks from now. If you can come back with any comments, then that would be really helpful and appreciated. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold off on amending it every day now. Like, there's a version that exists out in the world. What I'm going to wait for now is to get all of your feedback, and then I'm going to integrate it all in one more time so that in early August, we can come out with a final version. Having said that, in the future, I'm open to having, like a revision that, oh, we missed something here, we got to add it in. So I hope that that's helpful in terms of framing what we're doing, what the project is, and what the next steps will be. So what I'm going to do next, let me just quickly check in the chat if there's anything that we need to respond to. Yeah, so Brian said here, we've had an issue with ACC that might affect others. Is that within the scope of this initiative? I'm open to adding other things even if they're quite specific. I think we could have an other part, for example. I guess it depends what the specific issue will be, but why don't you now, what I'm going to do, I think, is send you to the breakouts. And this is a chance, because I really want to build a movement. This isn't just about a one-off thing. I think if we can do this well, maybe there will be other topics that we can connect on and create something that would be of use to others. So what I want you to do is not go away feeling like, oh, I heard Stephen talk for 20 minutes. I want you to go away thinking, actually, I got a chance to meet a real person, to have a little discussion, and then to give some real feedback. So what I'm going to do is send you into breakout rooms. If you can introduce yourself to the other people and briefly state your context, and I don't want you to spend the whole time explaining who you are and the amazing things you're involved in, because I know looking at your names, there's a lot there. But what I would welcome is that you can introduce yourself, and then please have a focus on those topics that I gave you, which is, how can we improve the content? Is there anything that we should add in? And also, is there anything in terms of the structure? How could we improve it? And then if you do want to brainstorm on how could we share it, then I welcome that as well. So looks like there is, yeah, and I see Hannah's comment there from the Akina Foundation. As you probably know, I do a lot of writing on social enterprise and the future of business. So I would like to consider integrating in a bit more of those concepts as well. You know, I think that is a growing flip side of the coin of charity, is for-purpose business as well. So great. So if you want to drop off, that's fine too. You've heard the intro and you know what this is about. So some of you may say, well, I need to go to something else, or, you know, but I will now send those of you who are here into breakouts. So hold on a second. And I really appreciate all of you joining today. Some of you are dropping off, and that's totally fine. So I'm going to create 5 breakouts. So there should be about 4 or 5 of you in each room. And I'm going to give you 10 minutes. And then actually, I'll give you 12 minutes. So there should be enough time to at least feedback to each other. And then there'll be enough time for each group to feedback to the bigger group what it is that you talked about. And maybe if you can appoint or think one of you can be the spokesperson for your group. All right, so I'm going to create the groups now. You may have to click something to join your group. All right, great. Welcome back from the rooms, everybody. I hope you had a good time. And I know it probably were in mid-thought as I hit the come back from the breakout rooms, but I'm just conscious of the time, so I want to make sure that we finish right just before 1 o'clock. So I would love to have some feedback and be able to then integrate that into the next versions and things. So can we go group by group and just let me know what were some of the key themes that you talked about, or some of the key things? If you want to, if it's too much, then somebody can email me afterwards. That's fine as well. So does one group want to go first?
I'll start.
Oh.
You want to go, Judy?
Okay. Oh, hi, Francesca. Yeah, thanks.
Hi.
Just quickly, in terms of something missing, there was a comment made about some things to do with the new Charities Act, and that's David. He's in the midst of marking up the document around that. We spent a lot of time talking about, there's a lot of information here, and some charities would be overwhelmed. And so what started out as a simple 15-point checklist has now morphed into something else. So there was just what could be done to help organisations thoughts at how they might use this. And in that context too, there was some conversation about where would this resource sit relative to a lot of other resources that are out there. And when it came to distribution and sharing it, well, you've got all of this network, and of course you are familiar, Stephen, with, you know, community governance, Aotearoa, and all the networks there where you could, you know, there'd be a public forum for sharing it. So that's just a quick feedback from our group.
Those are great points. Thank you. And the second one in particular I've been thinking about is that we don't want to scare people off with how many questions there are. One thing I was wondering about is, like, could we have you know, at the beginning of each section, put the most important ones at the top somehow, like the top 3 things. Everything else you can go through, but the top 3 things that you need to know are the bold ones. And maybe that would help to focus it. So I was thinking about reordering some of it to elevate some of the questions, but that was just my own thought. So, and I definitely welcome David's input in terms of other thoughts on changes, or that's good. And community governance Aotearoa, yeah, that's a great idea. They just put up the 7 principles of governance that I'd written as a resource on their website. I helped them set up as well, so I'm very familiar with what they're doing, and I agree that would be a good home. Thank you for that group. Good feedback. All right, maybe Francesca, because you, yep, go ahead.
So we talked about how will this work with, there's a lot of governance resources out there already. So how will this work with all the stuff that's out there already? And there was a little bit of concern about links going out of date. So how would it get updated and how often? And somebody suggested that maybe all the links were just in the back of a document so that it's really quick and easy to update for the person that's updating it.
Yep.
Someone really liked the high-level overview, which provides prompts. So it's kind of questions that lead to questions. Yeah, but then some people are looking for answers. So, you know, yeah, how does it fit for everybody? The checklist was good. I thought for me, I'd really like a yes/no tick box. So after the end of it, you know, maybe parallel to the notes, I can go, which ones have I ticked yes to, and which ones do I need to go back and review? Because otherwise I've just run a whole lot of stuff, and yeah. There was a question about, can we lift stuff from it to use in other places? So kind of what's the copyright on it, and can it be utilized for other uses?
Yep.
Someone said there are lots of changes in the not-for-profit sector, and language really matters. So I'll say for purpose as well. But we want to make sure that it's available for everybody. So some of the language, like, you know, when you're talking about trust board members, or for little committees, they don't see themselves as that. Yep. And we use at charity services officers. So there's a lot of different language for the same thing. And for sharing, we thought the national umbrella groups, this network as well, social media, LinkedIn, do some press releases. And that's about all our notes. But thank you very much, Stephen, for all the hard work and getting everyone coordinated.
Great. No, that's really helpful. I like the idea of having another column maybe with a yes/no box that, you know, I've read that one, or I need to do more about that. That's good. And in terms of the use of it, I view it as being a very collaborative. Like, you saw the initial thing that I did, right? And look what it's become. This has been part of the problem for me, is that like 49 people gave me their feedback, and then it naturally grew because that was a lot of different perspectives. But my view on it is that maybe we can add something at the beginning about the copyright position, which I would want anybody to take any part of it that they find helpful. So I could probably put a note there about that it's a Creative Commons. I think that's the right term to use, the Creative Commons license. Yeah, but that's a really good point, because I didn't, well, it's a first draft, right? So I didn't have that yet, but that would be a good idea. Thank you, group number 2. How about group number 3?
Group number 3 was us, I think. And quite conveniently, because there's a couple of things Francesca raised, which we also talked about. So I'll add a little bit to what's already been contributed, which would be great. But starting with the overarching, what did we think? We thought it was great. This is, as you know, in terms of let's start there and celebrating. It was really good that it covered such a range of stuff, and that they were quite accessible in those 5 little packets. Potentially, it has the list on the inside at the front as well. So just that's the good way of reminding people that they are all interconnected. The discussion in our group was quite interesting, because we had people from literally very small 3 trustees and 1 contractor through to large national for purpose or not for profit charity or organizations. So it was really good to have that discussion around how this might be applicable to different sized organizations. And long story short, I think it's very applicable to all. And there's a lot of for larger organizations in particular, or even for smaller ones, there was quite a lot of this work would be management focused, not necessarily governance focused. So perhaps speaking a little bit to Francesca's point around how smaller people don't see that divide so much, in terms of that it's a mixture of governance and management. So maybe just some of the prefacing in the intros around how that might be applied. But for those larger organizations where there's more rigorous management structure, it would sit very nicely beside business continuity plans and risk registers and that kind of stuff, not to replace them or replicate them, but a good prompt for some of those key discussions. In terms of improving, we also had a discussion around tick boxes, Francesca, which was one of the other things I wanted to pick up off on your guys' contribution. And it sort of started from the notes column is perhaps maybe there's a different name for it, because there's not really a lot of space for notes per se, but that's fine. And then it was, well, maybe it's a tick box to kind of go through them. But then we had a discussion around, we don't want this to become just a tick box exercise for people in terms of, wheel it out once a year and go tick, 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 tick. So we quite liked the fact that they were framed as questions, and they provides an opportunity for quite a spectrumal, if that's a word, answer, in terms of, well, it's not a binary answer to a lot of these questions. It invites the opportunity for people to explore them. So I think that's its benefit. And we kind of settle on that a little bit. But perhaps that couples quite nicely with your top, prioritizing a top few risks. So you have to chat about these ones, and then you can chat about others if you want. And then there was just a little bit, I think we were just getting into a conversation around what happens when it goes live and gets out there and becomes hopefully viral in the good sense of the word, but also in terms of multiple versions of the same thing. So we were just starting to get into that chat, but didn't really get into it. But maybe it's a wiki or something. Maybe there's more of a website based thing, or rather than the documents, or having a process for that. So I think that's probably most of what we covered. Yell out if I've missed something, our little room.
That's really good. Thank you. And this is why I wanted to have it, to get the different feedback. And, maybe Francesca, a version of the ticks box isn't a yes, no. It's more of a, I've read this, like a reminder that people, I've done that one or something.
We talked a little about ranking, Stephen, like how relevant might this be for us, or how much of a risk is that for us? 3 stars, 2 stars, something like that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I'm conscious as well. I think in the chat, someone had said there is a bit of duplication throughout it, which is naturally come because so many people have contributed different things that I think someone mentions a skill matrix here, and then later on it mentions does your board have the right composition or something. It's basically the same point. So it does still need a bit of refining, but I'm hopeful that with all the wonderful eyes in this room that we'll be able to pick up some of that thing as well, rather than relying on one person to do it all. But those are really helpful thoughts. Thank you. This is very good. All right, let's move to room number 4. Or you may not remember your room number, and that's fine. Just a 4th room.
I'll jump in here, Stephen. In our group, we like the way it's developed in terms of the format and the checklist. we talked about we don't really want it to be just a straight yes no, although some questions would be, but whilst it's a checklist, it's also we need prompt discussion and action. We spend a lot of time in our group, I think, talking about the importance of helping people, trustees, board members, officers, whatever we call them, particularly in some of our smaller organisations who are volunteers, particularly to understand why. Before we even get to the, is your founding document still applicable? Why do we have a founding document? Why what should it be? What should be some of the things that are in there? So just a small section without getting verbose about it, but before in each thing saying why these things are important to actually help people understand it. But if they understand the why, there's more chance of them actually going through and doing the exercise on a regular basis. And particularly because a lot of our organisations, our board members change regularly. New people come in and out, and it's very easy to forget that they don't necessarily know these things. We've thought there might be some ways to simplify it down again, and I think some of the stuff we've talked about already about prioritising it would help, helping people to understand these are the key things you must look at. Because again, we don't want it to be something that people go, it's 25 things. We haven't got time to go through all that, so we won't do any of it. We didn't get much further than that, really. We spent a lot of time talking about those sort of things. So unless there's anything else that my group wanted to add, I think that covers it.
Well, that's really helpful because you picked up on another thing that had been circling in the back of my mind as well. And someone in the chat had mentioned this, which is having an explanation about the different parts. And I think that's a great idea, and I like the way you phrased it. Why is this important? So, how it has the title and then it's got the table. Maybe there could be a very short 2 or 3 lines for each of the points saying the reason a founding document is important is it's the foundation on which your organization operates. And therefore, something like that. And then cybersecurity, cybersecurity is important because That's really good. Thank you. Have we got a last group?
Kia ora, yes, tēnā koutou katoa. I was in a group with Rodney, Sanel, Graham and Jenny. Made the mistake of asking at the end of our discussion, we have to choose a spokesperson. And then, you'd just never be the person to point out that you need a spokesperson because you end up with a job. So we, similar to a lot of things that have been mentioned, one of the first things we talked about was the kind of the size and thinking about the end user. So who do you imagine this being in the hands of? Somebody with a lot of community governance experience, not much new, overwhelmed, time strapped, all that sort of thing. So really important that it's not voluminous and doesn't try to be exhaustive. So again, as a comms person, I'm always like less is more. And if you want people to consume it, you need to make it, so the whole plain language and bite-sized chunks. So similar to, I think, a point you mentioned earlier, Stephen, our group talked about maybe prioritizing, grouping the questions up and scaffolding the learning and discussion. So, your starting point is not, oh my gosh, there's 25 questions I have to work through. And you get to the third one and you've already got like 10 months work to do because you've realized the gaps, and then it becomes overwhelming, and anything that causes overwhelm and shame and guilt is going to be just parked somewhere where it doesn't cause me pain. So how can we scaffold the helpful pointers, the questions, so that it's a friend it's a friend alongside you, the arm around you going, hey, and grouping them again in terms of, the basics, like you said, the most important. If you do nothing else, think about these 5 things. I'm a huge fan of 3s and 5s. And then maybe some intermediate things once you've got those nailed and you're feeling comfortable. And then, the extra for experts or for the really mature organizations, or you might be a more complex. These might be some, some more potential hooks, but don't worry about those if you just concentrate on the basics, if that's where you are. So putting it in chunks that people feel safe to explore. I think, and Jenny actually had some specific feedback, which we'll probably send through, I imagine, around content, missing content and things to consider. But just I think none of us had really had the opportunity to explore in any depth or review it. So these were very kind of initial thoughts. We also thought about, in terms of it being useful, field testing it as well with people. I mean, it might, we're probably all involved in charities or community governance in different ways. Put it in people's hands and say, and get their reactions. Somebody who's perhaps not close, hasn't reviewed it. How would you use this? Is this, what would make it more useful, less useful? Can you, like a car salesperson, can you see yourself in this car? Can you see yourself using this document? And one other thing that I didn't raise in our group, so not representative, but I'm conscious with things like this, just the extent to which it possibly represents or comes from one worldview, and so the need, so a question for me is, how can this collection of documents on a te tiriti o Waitangi and create space for people to how can it stimulate and encourage boards to consider Māori worldview, Te Ao Māori, a treaty partnership in the context of governance policies. And again, forgive me if that's there in the content and I just haven't seen it because I haven't reviewed them yet.
Yeah. Oh, those are wonderful thoughts. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a whole, one of the 25 is Te Tiriti. That I agree with you totally though. And I would love to get more diverse perspectives. Frankly speaking, when we organize these things, you're right. Often we end up getting people who think like us. And so it'd be great to get more inputs. So I welcome that. Yeah, I think where we're getting to then, like I'm just brainstorming as we're going, it's going to almost look like this, kind of like at the top things that are the issues, and then the medium things. And then, if you have time, think about these. Like, I think it could be prioritized a lot better. And maybe we do choose like the top 3 things and put them up the front. Because I agree that when I first started the idea, it simply arose from the fact that I see charities facing the exact same issues hundreds of times. And if I'm one person who's dealt with hundreds of charities, that means that there's thousands of charities. Well, we know there's 28,000 registered. There's a whole bunch of other groups that aren't registered. So they're all going through similar issues all the time. So that was the reason behind it, is surely we could come up with, here's a health check, or here's the top things that you should be thinking about. But I agree with you. It has a tendency to grow once you start getting into it. And that was why I then was splitting it into the 5 different topics, because I didn't want it to become like a textbook, 30-page thing. That's really helpful. And I think having some sort of a reviewed column would be helpful too. Well, that's really good. Thank you, everybody. That's exactly what I was hoping to get from this session. So very positive, helpful feedback there. What I'm going to do next is hit stop on the record. And then my plan is to quickly make this a video that I can share so that other people can, and if they're interested, and they can actually be on the same page as all of you. And that way it's taking everyone on the same journey and giving them access. They may choose not to get involved, but at least it was there as an option. And then I'm going to send it out, all the documents, to the 750 people on the email list so that they can start inputting as well if they choose to. And on the document control, I'm fortunate in that I have people who can help me. So I have someone who's dedicated to this project. So don't lose sleep that I'm sitting there copy pasting everybody, right? Like, I'm really lucky I've got resource that can help us to craft this. And so my commitment would be that we'll get it up to speed in early August. At some point it will get released. But then my hope would be that it does evolve over time. And maybe a year from now, it looks a bit different to today. So I think I can safely say that I can commit resource to that, and that we'll be able to keep the links updated and keep a master version, because we won't want there to be multiple, holding the pen. Someone has to hold the pen, and I'm happy to do that. So great. Well, I haven't got anything else on this project to say. So just to say thank you for joining me. I will use the chance, since there's so many of you on the call, to say I continue to work on Seeds podcast. This week will be episode 355. So if you're after interesting content, there's a whole lot of stories there of people doing amazing things. They go for an hour, so you have to kind of commit to it, but I can guarantee you'll learn something from each person I've interviewed. And in October, I'm going to be rolling out the Seeds Impact Conference. So I've already confirmed 27 slots, 4 different Zoom rooms, 1 room only about community, and 3 rooms where people will be speaking. So I've got things like 3 former Christchurch mayors will be talking about what it's like after you're a mayor. So Leanne Dalzell, Gary Moore, and Vicky Buck. That will be an interesting session. Got Sam Johnson, the founder of the Student Volunteer Army, talking about when is it time to step away from the organization that you founded. So he's going to be sharing about that topic with some other founders. Got some people like the Akina Foundation, the IOD, whole bunch of groups that you'll know are going to be sharing as well. So if you're willing to tell people about it, it would be very much appreciated, because I don't really have a budget. I'm just doing it. It's going to be $20 to join the whole day and be part of that event. So it's a very low cost entry point for a lot of amazing content. So thanks, everybody. Really appreciate you joining today. I hope you all have a wonderful long weekend, and we'll come back refreshed next week. I hope that Matariki, it's actually a great time to be doing an initiative like this, because it's the start of a new year in that calendar system. So time to reflect, and thank you so much. Really want to make sure that you understand how valuable your input is, and I really admire what each of you are doing in your own spheres. So please keep it up, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.